Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Would you please come and have a seat? Come on up to the front. We are very lucky today because we're being filmed by Community TV, which is one of the most extraordinary resources in our community. And they are here today because of two reasons. Number one, the little San Lorenzo Valley is actually being paid attention to by our local state assembly member, which is wonderful, and also because the issues at hand environmentally are so enormous right now. So I'm Nancy Macy, and I'm one of the founding members of the Valley Women's Club, and it's been quite a ride for the past 33 plus years. And this is one of the things we do. We get involved in politics from an issues point of view, and we care enough about the Valley that we get involved in what's going on locally in education, environmental issues, women's issues, anything relating to the quality of life of the Valley. So you're welcome to join the Valley Women's Club if you aren't already members, and that would be wonderful because we need all the support we can get. I want to introduce Ty Stills, whose work on the Environmental Committee has been extremely valuable, and she's going to introduce our guest speaker today. Ty.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's my pleasure for the third year in a row to welcome our local assembly member, Bill Monning, to Felton and to speak to us today about things that we all are concerned about with regards to the environment. It's been a pretty tough year in the state of California with regards to the budget problems and deficit reductions, and those directly impact us in the way of what kind of environmental protections we're going to lose as a result of not having funding to enforce them, and also Jerry Brown's stated goal at this point to close 70 of the 278 state parks or let volunteer groups run things like Castle Rock State Park here in Santa Cruz County, which is one of the 3 in the county proposed to be closed. There's all kinds of other hotshot environmental issues going on out there, and what we're really pleased about our assembly member is that he really has a very firm grasp on environmental concerns and environmental issues locally, common to the Central Coast, which has a lot of different ecological systems, from agrarian and agricultural things to major riparian corridors, major redwood forests, you know, really, and then all the coastal resources and all the marine resources. It's really quite a lot of different environments to understand and to figure out how to integrate your efforts with. And one of his other main interests is in the health area and in public health. And certainly two things don't go together any better than when you're talking about trying to protect the environment and protect public health. The efforts of some to think that these are separate issues, that you can degrade the environment and somehow that's not going to negatively affect the health of the citizenry, is somewhat foolish. So we need these voices of reason, like our wonderful Bill Monning. Please come on up.
Well, thank you, Ty. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful Felton afternoon. I also want to just thank all the members of the San Lorenzo Valley Women's Club for their organizing, not just today, but the role they've played for years as almost a de facto government in terms of bringing people together and working for the public and the common good. In my mind, they maybe represent the good things about government without all the baggage and the bad things about government. But also special thanks to Nancy Macy for her great work and the invitation. Let's thank Nancy. And I also want to thank Mark for his organizing for today. I also want to acknowledge Community Television for being here and for really being the link between what is happening in our communities, what's happening in government, and providing that bridge to the people, because increasingly our corporate media does not provide that service. My wife and I stopped watching TV a long time ago. Unfortunately, the local news, with some rare exceptions, it's a crime log, weather that is those predictions are more often wrong than they are accurate. And then sports, if you've stayed up that late. And that's made their best service is local sports, putting a spotlight on the high school kids. But it is community television, and it's more and more alternative media, public supported media that is our link between what's happening in government, whether it's at the local level, Sacramento, or nationally. And we really need to fight to keep that connective tissue between what we're doing in government and informing the people that we're elected to represent. One of my biggest frustrations, I'm in my second term in the state assembly, and towards the southern end of my district, I represent parts of Monterey County, Santa Cruz County, and southern Santa Clara County. Some of our local dailies, Sacramento's just not on the radar. So it's ultimately a disservice to the taxpayer and to voters not to receive information as to what is happening in government. So we get the big headlines, legislative deadlock, legislature not doing its job, but very little drilling down to see, well, what is causing this gridlock? Is it neither side's willing to compromise, neither side's willing to talk, or is there a little more to that story? So time permitting, I'd like to share a little bit of that insight to what this recent session's been like. I would like to start off, though, affirmatively talking about some of the legislation on environmental issues, and then also addressing some of the questions that were raised in advance from the club about some more localized environmental issues, some which have very direct state links. I also just want to pick up on the theme that Ty shared in her introduction of the nexus between public health and environmental health. And it seems like a no-brainer and doesn't need to be said, but I think we have to remind ourselves and young people and the citizenry in general that environmental health has everything to do with human health. When we look at the state of the health of our oceans, the state of the health of endangered species like the sea otter or the condor, and campaigns and people working very hard to protect endangered species or protect the health of our water or our oceans. Will you trace any of that back? If we're not successful in those efforts, we're degrading an environment that the human species is dependent upon. And increasingly, whether it's climate change, which is a huge global issue obviously, or our more local issues of water quality, air quality, etc., that becomes a measuring stick for our human health, for the health of our children. Asthma rates in the Central Valley are out of control due to air contaminants, diesel and pesticides. We have health problems related to diet and nutrition when we live in an area rich in agricultural resources, and yet we have families working in the fields who don't have the buying power or the education to provide healthful foods to their children. And this leads to trends of youth obesity, preventable diabetes, etc. Now, as the chair of the Health Committee, one can become depressed by these trends and statistics, or as many politicians, I think we have a defective or a healthy gene called optimism. And so I look at these trends leading to preventable diabetes, and I focus on the word preventable. And what preventable means is that working together, we can change these trends. And just as we can do it with these patterns of human health and a healthcare system built on treating disease and illness instead of promoting health and wellness, we need to approach our environmental health in the same fashion. We need to do it not treating degradation and disease, but promoting health and wellness of our environmental resources. So when we bring that to the playing field of Sacramento, issues that may seem like they would lend themselves better to just scientific assessment and resolution, when we put that into the political mix, we then have to figure out how do we create the dynamics to achieve the political victories essential to protecting our environmental health and our human health. So this last session, as you know, everything's eclipsed right now by our budget crisis. We started this year with a $26 billion deficit. What that means is the revenue coming into the state falls short by $26 billion, the costs that the state has assumed. And so one reaction to that is, well, you just got to live within your means, just like a household budget. You're spending $26 billion too much, so just cut that spending. And yet, I have yet to find a constituent who wants us to cut funding to K through 12 education, or higher education, or environmental protection, or public safety, or the ability to respond to fires in our communities. No, we want that. We want our roads repaired. We want government services, but we got to live within a revenue stream now that's dropped 30% since 2008. Well, that's not the fault of a party or a politician in Sacramento. It traces back to the collapse of the U.S. financial industry. It's been a global economic crash, and that's led to the recession in this state and this nation, the drop of 30% of revenues to our state government, and the challenge we face in California of having to have a balanced budget every year. So conservative economists say the way out of that huge deficit is a combination of cut spending, prudent borrowing, and raising revenues. That's what Ronald Reagan did when he was governor. That's what Pete Wilson did when he was governor. When Pete Wilson was governor in the early 90s, we had a $14 billion deficit. And he held a press conference. He said, this is going to be painful. We're going to have to cut $7 billion in spending, and we're going to have to raise $7 billion in revenue. He got bipartisan support for that solution. That was an ancient period of political history in this state and this country. And now we're facing the dynamics of a minority party in this state that signs a contractual commitment never to raise revenues, never to raise taxes anytime, anywhere, anyhow, regardless of circumstance, regardless of crisis, regardless of making cuts now that are going to cost us more to restore in the future. The closure of adult health daycare, the closure of over 80 state parks. None of these are easy decisions, but they're the only option when there's not a solution that can include any form of revenues, even the extension of existing revenues, which we needed 2/3 votes to put on a ballot. We couldn't get the 2 votes in the Senate. We couldn't get the 2 votes in the Assembly. So we had to go back. Not letting the voters have a voice on that meant a loss of $8 billion per year of revenue. We can't carry over that deficit, so how did we solve it? We had to cut another $8 billion. So it is not happy times. There were no good choices. There were bad and worse. And I lay this backdrop because it very much affects everything we care about in terms of environmental protection, environmental enforcement, the funding of enforcement agencies like Fish and Game that have been dropped by over 37% in the state budget, and that limits and contracts the ability to enforce laws that have been passed by our state legislature or passed by the voters. So we've lost that funding, and the closure of the parks. Now, how do you close a state park? You can put up a sign that says closed. You can't close coastal access. The head of state parks, Ruth Coleman, has said, we will not prevent public access to the coast. That's part of the Coastal Act. So we may put a closed sign, we may stop removing trash, we may stop providing security and operations and maintenance, but people will still have to have access. So one of the bills we passed this session that was just signed by Governor Brown was AB 42 by my colleague Jared Huffman from Marin County that allows now for the state parks, which is under Natural Resources Agency, whose secretary is now John Laird, my predecessor, a wonderful appointment by Governor Brown, in my view, and a great position for John, and more importantly, a great position for Californians to have him at the helm. So as a cabinet secretary, he oversees state parks led by Ruth Coleman, and this AB 42 will allow state parks now to enter into MOUs or contractual arrangements with nonprofit organizations to keep parks that have been targeted for closure open or open on a limited basis. And I know there's been tremendous work here in Santa Cruz County, also in Monterey County, existing nonprofits that are stepping up to try to help keep these parks open. But to me, it's emblematic of how critical the crisis is in our state budget, in our state government. Because balancing a budget by closing parks, we're shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of not only the precious resource for recreation and education, but the parks are also economic drivers in our communities. The state parks in my district alone generate about $1 billion a year in related business activity, from corner stores to motels to restaurants, and the list goes on. So the gravity of this crisis, we are making cuts that are going to have a domino effect that further weaken the economy. And so a lot of our proposals in the legislature, we get charged, well, those are job killers, AB 32. Well, that's a job killer. And they put a ballot measure on in 2010 that was defeated before the implementation had even started, blaming AB 32, which sets targets for CO2 emissions in the state of California, and saying that it was a job killer. So it's this magic language, if it's a job killer, it's bad. Well, there was no data to show that AB 32, in fact, has been a job killer. To the contrary, the leading investment of venture capitalists in California today is in the field of alternative energy production. Solar, wind, wave, tide, and we have now what we call green-green conflicts between those who want to develop and promote alternative energy and environmental groups wanting to make sure that solar fields or wind energy fields aren't going to have an unintended adverse environmental consequence to habitat, endangered species, etc. But there's been some wonderful negotiations going on between these new entrepreneurs and energy developers and NRDC, National Resources Defense Council, California League of Conservation Voters, working to minimize unwanted consequences and maximizing development of alternative energy sources. This puts us on track with AB 32 obligations, but more important than any legal standard is that it's the right thing to do. We have to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel, and we can do it with rich natural resources that can generate that energy, and we can use it in a fashion that is smarter. So in that field, Senator Simitian, who represents this district currently, was successful in his bill to set a target that any energy producer, any vendor of electrical energy in the state of California, by 2020, at least a third of it has to be generated from alternative energy sources. This is the highest target of any state in the nation and the most rapid timetable to get there. And so the opponents during that said job killer, said too rapid, we can't do it, it's going to hurt business. And yet the entrepreneurial spirit in this state, that's where the venture capital is being invested. So yes, it's a great achievement, and we should be proud of it, and we should work to make sure we hit that 2020 target. Another one that sets a 2020 target, and that's, what, 9 years, which in terms of history, that's a pretty steep climb, pretty rapid, is our landfills by 2020 will have to be able to recycle, reuse 75% of everything brought through the gates of that landfill. Now in Santa Cruz, I think we're over 60%. Monterey also has a very dynamic landfill and recycling. There's a mercantile exchange where one person's garbage becomes another person's treasure. That generates over $400,000 a year. It employs all the staff who operate it. It's like a giant thrift shop, but it's things people are bringing out to the landfill. And instead of 5 years ago that would have gone into the landfill, we've extended the life of the landfill in Monterey County by 150 years by actions taken in the last 10 years. So there's all these markers of people doing incredible work. And this bill by my colleague Wes Chesbrough, who had been on the Waste Management Board that sets the 75% standard, that also has to be implemented by the year 2020. We passed the bill on BPA, the bisphenol additive used in baby bottles and some containers of infant formula. We failed last year. We couldn't get the majority vote in the Senate. This year we got it through both houses and the governor signed it. Again, industry said it would be a job killer. Public health doctors said they're concerned the risk this could be a baby killer. And if you're going to choose between them saying it's a job killer and something that has not been proven safe, I think we made the right decision. They're already generating alternatives. It's a container. There's multiple choices for containers. You know, our problem in this state is we chase chemical by chemical as opposed to having a green standard or exercise of a precautionary principle where we put the burden on the producer, as they do in Europe, prove it is safe before it is licensed for use. In my work in earlier years with the United Farm Workers Union, with CRLA, responding to chemical poisonings of farm workers, we had chemical after chemical implicated in crew poisonings, birth defects, wrongful death, and those chemicals got taken off the market. But they only got taken off the market after the human tragedy. So the burden of proof is put on the backs of the people least able to protect themselves. So I'll go through the alphabet of some of those chemicals. DDT, which had such devastating environmental impacts, and it's still in the food chain. The condors feeding on sea lions dead on the beach are being contaminated by DDT that is still in that ecosystem. And it was outlawed over 30 years ago, probably closer to 50 years ago. DBCP used in agriculture, TOK used in agriculture, metacystoxar, all of those pulled from the market after a toll of human impacts. So I've been working on a campaign that some of you may be familiar with, a chemical that has been registered for use in California agriculture called methyl iodide. Methyl iodide is seen as the, in some eyes, the chemical of choice to be used as an alternative to methyl bromide. So these are both soil fumigants. They're injected in the soil before the planting, so it's not sprayed on the plant. It's injected in the soil as a gas. Methyl bromide also had the side effect of depleting the ozone layer. So under international treaty in Montreal in 1995, the world community said we need to phase out methyl bromide globally. The US kept getting extensions arguing economic necessity. But 2014 will be the last year that methyl bromide will be available, and they're shrinking the supply each year. So the growers looked for an alternative. And methyl iodide, developed by a Japanese company called Arista, is seen as the next best replacement to methyl bromide, a soil fumigant. Now, it's better because it doesn't deplete the ozone. It's worse because it's more unstable and it's more highly toxic to workers and rural residents. It's a neurotoxin, it's cancer causing, birth defect causing, mutation causing, and it's a water contaminant. Instead of going up into the ozone, it sinks down into the water table. So the federal EPA approved it 10 days before Bush left office, and California Department of Pesticide Regulation approved it 10 days before Schwarzenegger left office. And now there's an investigation of communications between the former head of DPR and Arista. She registered it with restrictions, but she raised the allowable exposure level 100-fold over what the staff scientists said would be safe. So staff scientists said there should be no allowable exposure level higher than 0.0 0.3 parts per billion, and what was registered was exposure levels of 32 parts per billion, 100-fold higher than staff scientists recommended. An independent scientific peer review committee of at least 7 scientists from around the country were unanimous in concluding unsafe at any speed. There's no label instruction that can guarantee the safety of the worker or the rural resident. The department responds, says, yes, but we put a half-mile buffer zone around a school. You can't use it within a half-mile of a school, but you can use it within a quarter-mile of a residential area. Well, that's illogical on its face. There's no other chemical that has ever suggested a 1/2 mile buffer zone. Now, interestingly, and I make it very clear, our fight is not with local agriculture. They're looking for safe alternatives. Many in the conventional farming said they won't use methyl iodide, it's too costly, and they're gonna have to take too much acreage out of production. And we have organic farmers like Swanton Berries, Jim Cochran. For 30 years, they've been producing healthful, wholesome berries. Their workers have a contract, they have a health plan, they have a pension plan, and now they have a profit sharing plan. And I went on a tour out there a few months ago, and they took me out to one of the berry fields, and the furrows were about 3 feet high. And Jim said to me, he said, so you know why we have the furrows up like that? And I'm thinking soil treatment, mulching, some kind of science. And that was my answer, and he said, no, it's so the workers don't have to bend over. And I said, well, that's ingenious. Do you lose yield or acreage? He said, no, our production goes up because the workers are less fatigued through the course of a shift. And you drive down Highway 1 or anywhere else in our community and you see the workers. We got rid of the short-handled hoe on lettuce, but the only way to pick berries is to bend over. So now you've got the furrow at 3 feet. A worker can move along, pick the berries, and not destroy their back in the process. So I went on a little bit about methyl iodide. Let me just tell you where we are in that campaign. Governor Brown has not yet appointed a new director for the Department of Pesticide Regulation. It's our sense that he will use that appointment to determine and allow that appointee to determine whether he or she will request a review of the science around methyl iodide. That's been our request. Review this registration, reconsider it. The state of Washington has blocked the licensing of methyl iodide. What did they rely upon to reach their decision? The science from California. They took the science developed by the Department of Pesticide Regulation, the Independent Scientific Review Commission. It was good enough for them. They said not in the state of Washington. So we need to promote alternatives. We need to help our local agriculture to make advances beyond some of the chemical dependent farming and back them up if they're willing to make that commitment. So I've convened a little rump group in Sacramento of some of the grower representatives, the Strawberry Commission, the certified organic farmers, and looking at ways that either state or federal government could help incentivize people moving more of their acreage into non-chemical dependence. A couple of other bills that you probably heard of, the styrofoam bill to ban styrofoam containers for use by restaurants and other retail outlets. We passed it off the assembly floor. It was carried by Senator Lowenthal from San Diego. We didn't have the votes in the Senate, and so he's converted that to a 2-year bill. Again, the argument against, jobs, jobs, jobs. There's a manufacturing facility in Southern California and one up in Stockton, probably 500 to 600 jobs. My question is, let's pass the ban on styrofoam and just convert those factories to produce whatever it is, recyclable cardboard, whatever it is. You don't have to get rid of the workers, you just got to change what's coming off that assembly line. So that one will be back, and we're going to need support on that. The plastic bag ban, Julia Brownlee from Santa Monica introduced that last year. It failed again on the Senate floor. She held it back this session, but is planning to reintroduce it in January. In the meantime, a lot of local jurisdictions have passed both plastic bans and styrofoam bans. Throughout this region, City of Santa Cruz, Watsonville, Monterey, so people are doing it. And some of the retail grocers, they support a statewide regulation because they want uniformity. They don't want the trucks going to this city to have one standard and to this city another standard. So there's a lot to be said for uniformity when we try to protect the environment and protect the public. I commented on state parks. I wanted to mention two bills that I worked hard on this year. One was reauthorization for the Sea Otter state tax reform. Thank you. So now when you get your state tax form, you have an elective choice to allocate $1, $5, $20, it's voluntary, to the Sea Otter Research and Preservation Fund. That has to be reauthorized every 5 years, and it has to generate about $200,000 a year to maintain its eligibility to stay on the income tax. And now we compete with other good causes. We also passed one this year for seeking a cure to ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. There's some veterans provisions on there to help veterans in transition in housing. So there's a lot of good options, but the Sea Otter option provides the money for research to try to understand why is our sea otter population already fragile, continuing to be in decline, and it's that voluntary tax checkoff that is primarily funding that research, trying to find causes and cures. So the governor signed that a while back, and then we've also been working with a lot of stakeholders to take down the San Clemente Dam on the Carmel River. The San Clemente Dam was built, it was the 30s or the 40s, I believe. It's not a functional dam, it's full of silt, and it also blocks the path of the steelhead salmon coming up the Carmel River. It is owned by Cal-Am. The solution has involved Cal-Am. Well, what we're trying to do is get Cal-Am to leverage their cheaper option. It's seismically unsafe. So they're under order of the state to take it down or reinforce it. So plan A for Cal-Am was going to be, we'll just fill it with cement, put up some more pipe and some more rebar, and it will be judged seismically safe, but it will continue to be an environmental menace on the Carmel River. So working with the Ocean Conservancy, which I'm a member of their board appointed by the Speaker, with Bureau of Land Management, with Sam Farr's office. It's been a federal, state, and county collaboration with the Ocean Conservancy kind of taking the lead. We've been able to allocate some bond money, not from the general fund, not new taxes, existing bonds that are eligible for sale, to leverage a greater contribution from Cal-Am to do what we consider to be the environmentally preferred option, which is to take down the dam in a safe manner. They'll have to remove the silt, and then they'll use the deconstructed dam. It won't be blown up, it'll be taken down in pieces, and then they'll use that to layer upriver shelves that the steelhead can move up, and it will protect homes and houses downstream, and it will extend the reach and the life and the species habitat of the steelhead. So the governor did sign that. We faced a letter of opposition from the finance department in the 11th hour. We had to pull a fire drill. We ran down to the Horseshoe. We called John Laird's office. We called Ocean Conservancy, and we got everybody to walk this staff person through the steps of what's been about a 3-year project to get everybody on board. And so they removed the opposition. The governor signed that into law next week. And that's on course to start in 2015, the actual deconstruction of the San Clemente Dam. So let me just, I I think I've hit some legislative highlights. I know there were some contained in questions that can come up. I know there's been concern about the assessment of a fire fee to support CAL FIRE. Again, part of trying to bridge a $26 billion gap. CAL FIRE falls short, if we're in fire seasons, of their budget allocation, and we often have to scramble to find resources to support the emergency response of CAL FIRE. The governor proposed a use fee of people who own land that is adjacent to or served by CAL FIRE. The problem is some people also live in a fire district where they're paying fees to their fire district and now would pay a double fee if this were allocated. The governor signed that in his budget. It is being challenged in court, but he's retained Scotts Valley Fire Chief Mike McMurray, who some of you may know, to lead his task force on the implementation of this and to address some of the concerns that have been raised. And it's kind of interesting because Chief McMurray visited my office in Sacramento during the budget cycle with other firefighters raising concerns about this fee. He visited the governor's office. He's very articulate, and the governor's appointed him now to be a director to figure out how to do this in a manner that doesn't double tax people but achieves the goal of people that are served by CAL FIRE paying a share of that protection, where it's currently, there's this mantra right now in Sacramento, users should pay. Fees should link to service. So somebody that lives in the inner city in South Central LA, they're saying, why should I pay for CAL FIRE service when they're never going to put out a fire in my neighborhood? And the same with the water issues. You know, the water bond issue that was passed in 2010 with my no vote was postponed for the ballot until 2012. This started as an $8 billion bond measure. In 24 hours, it grew to an $11 billion bond measure. The selling point was to protect the Delta area and that habitat, but the beneficiaries were largely Southern California and Westlands Water District farmers seeking a peripheral canal that would take Northern California Sierra water around the Delta and directly into the Westlands and down to Southern California. Yes, and the challenge with that is that for the restoration of the Delta, we can't diminish the water that's coming through it. We actually have to figure out how to enhance the water that's coming through it. I think it's off the table for now. Just the economics of it alone, the debt service on that would be about $900 million a year. And that goes at the top of the spending ledger, not at the bottom. So before you pay schools, fire, prisons, anything else, you pay debt service. So Californians have to be really sure that this offers them something that's going to enhance our water management and not diminish it. I think it should be contracted in scale, and the main measurement should be Delta restoration. And the question of who pays, if we're not the beneficiaries of a state water plan, why should we be asked to help pay for it? The people in Southern California, if they're going to be the beneficiaries, it should be factored into what they're paying for the cost of water. I'd like to see our support going into water quality issues, treating our water, and figuring out how to use better conservation methods, treatment of gray water, and removing some of the restrictions that prevent us from using gray water and minimizing the amount of fresh water, potable water resource we need for irrigation, for parks, for agriculture, etc. And some of this simply involves navigating between state and some local permitting issues. I think what I'd like to see be part of a revised water bond at the statewide level are components that prioritize conservation and reuse, recycling and reuse of water. We can get ourselves a long way towards a balance with our water needs by just being smarter about how we use it. So I've rambled here for a while. Most of you look like you're still awake. Why don't I stop there and open it up to your questions? And do you want people to come to a microphone? Do you need that for the... Yeah, as long as I'll repeat the questions as best I can. So we'll start here at the back. Yes. Ty asked about the status of the high-speed rail. California voters did pass a bond measure in support of high-speed rail that would have issued about $10 billion of bonds, not sufficient to construct the entire high-speed rail. It made California eligible for federal support. We've received about $8 billion of federal support. Part of that was part of the ARA money, and part of it was part of the Obama administration's commitment to high-speed rail. Some of that now is jeopardized because of the new majority in the House and trying to lower our debt ceiling by removing some of those commitments to high-speed rail and transportation. I supported the high-speed rail ballot measure at the time. I think it would serve California. It would reduce CO2 emissions in terms of reducing reliance on plane flights, on automobiles, etc. So on an environmental, if we could fast forward 20 years and have it constructed, it certainly would benefit our state. Its construction could benefit us in this time of high unemployment as well. That said, given the gravity of our budget crisis right now, adding more debt service to our strained budget for a project that will not come online in terms of its service to the community and to the environment for many years, I think it's a question of timing. And one question in terms of how we prioritize transportation, I think we should be prioritizing local transportation, expanding local bus services. We have a public servant here with Santa Cruz Metro, which does an incredible job, but in the areas that I represent, local transportation is challenged for adequate funding and support, and this constant tug-of-war between, do we expand our highways and put our money into more vehicle lanes, or should that money be going into light rail, more bus service, van service? One of the issues is how you convert a culture that is so car dependent, single occupancy vehicle travel. How do we incentivize people getting to that bus terminal or that train terminal? And now there's Wi-Fi in some of the trains and the buses. People can telecommute while they're transiting to work. We just have to make it accessible. I've learned recently what's it called, the last mile between the station and your home, and public safety issues. Are people safe walking or bike riding? And or can we do more with shuttles that collect people and bring them to points? But in Santa Clara County, for example, the commuter rail there, they're cutting back their schedule because of funding. More people are getting back in their cars. And so when they talk in the Santa Clara Valley about the high-speed rail coming over Pacheco Pass, a hub in Gilroy, and then zooming by Morgan Hill into the South Bay, people say, some people say, well, that may be good in the long run, but what about our current rail service that's being cut back? Why don't we focus on that first? And I think there's a logic to that. For our tourism industry, the second largest employer in my assembly district, it's agriculture number 1, hospitality tourism number 2, and education number 3. Those are the main economic engines in our communities. And our occupancy rates are down in our hotels. It again links our environment to what draws people here. People want to see sea otters. They want to be able to go in the ocean. And so again, our environmental integrity is essential and linked with our economic viability. But so a high-speed rail coming through Gilroy, that could actually be good for the Monterey Bay region of people then coming on buses or light rail from Gilroy to tourism and not clogging up our roads with cars. So, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I don't know if that was a conclusive answer, Ty, but kind of a rambling assessment of the good, the bad, and the ugly of high-speed rail. Yes. First, again, I thank you and everything that Santa Cruz Metro is doing. I think one of our challenges is in our budget framework. how do we support public transit? And as you alluded to, under the prior administration, Governor Schwarzenegger, in one of his budget proposals, eliminated all public funding of public transportation. His argument, it should be supported by a free market system. And if it's viable, it should pay for itself. Well, we did a little research. There's not a single public transit system in the world that doesn't get some level of government support. Why? Because it serves a public interest and a public good. So what we have to figure out in our budget crisis, and this is what I kind of hear in your question, what we were talking about, is how do we appropriately prioritize investment in public transit and link it very clearly to our AB 32 objectives. There was a Senate Bill 375 by Darrell Steinberg that looks at community development being prioritized, building up and not out, building close to public transportation hubs, and reducing vehicle miles driven. That's kind of the magic code of reducing CO2 emissions from cars, getting more people into buses and trains. So what we need to do is make sure people understand in the discussion of how we build our budget the value of investment in public transit, helping us meet so many other public interests and targets. It's not just moving people, it's changing how we think about the transport of people in a manner that protects our environment, reduces ozone depletion and global warming, and also relieves pressure on our streets and arteries and makes safer access to transportation. But it's a constant public education challenge. And maybe I'll just take this opportunity to segue of, I alluded earlier to our challenges of how the media connects our government to the people and the taxpayer. We face a constant challenge of keeping people engaged in our democracy. And there's a lot of cynicism, and it's for good cause. People look to government and they don't see it being responsive, they see things getting worse, and it's kind of a natural human reaction. They drop away, they pull away from it, and they stop voting. Well, what that does is it seeds even more power to those who are very engaged pursuing their self-interest in government regulation or trying to get rid of government regulation, and who have a constant presence pounding away at government. So campaign finance reform is a critical issue. Who has full-time presence in Washington and Sacramento? Who has the high-paid lobbyists? It's the companies and corporations with the most resources. And in light of the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, which at the federal level, our US Supreme Court says you cannot deny a corporation the ability to contribute an unlimited amount into a campaign process because it's equated to free speech. But to me what that says is the more money you have, the more free speech you have and the louder a voice you're going to have. And to me that's not a healthy democracy. And it goes back to this question of corporate personhood. I don't think the Founding Fathers, our Constitution, was based on a principle that was seeking to afford and protect the rights of corporations. People should have primary right and primary voice in a healthy political process in democracy. And we're going to need to restore that and keep fighting for it so that we can put front and center a healthful discussion, a principled discussion, whether it's public transportation, coastal protection, marine mammal protection, agricultural chemicals, whatever it is. We need a level playing field to have that conversation in an unbiased fashion. You've been waiting to say something at the back. Yes, sir. I just want to pick one kernel from that of how we're moving, whether it's as government or as communities at a snail's pace. I agree with you. I think part of the Occupy Wall Street is a healthy reaction of a cynical, disengaged, disenfranchised citizenry that's reacting. And you know, people criticize, they say, well, it's leaderless, the objectives aren't clear, the demands aren't clear, but what's coming through loud and clearly to me, and whether it's Wall Street or now Santa Cruz or Monterey or San Jose, is the 99% versus the 1%. And at the core of a lot of our problems is the lack of equity in our taxation system that translates into a lack of equity in our social system, our political system, our economic system. And so I think we are well positioned as consumers, as taxpayers, as people who want to live in healthy communities to examine and investigate a tax system that is inequitable and where the top 1% aren't paying their fair share. I think for California, what we need to look at is first have the conversation, what kind of state do we want to live in? What's the California? We've lost the ability to dream because we're always on the defensive. We're always reacting. We're always trying to hold on, stop the next wave of cuts to education, the next wave of cuts to higher education. We need to step back and say, here's the California I want to live in. And articulate what would a healthy school system look like, healthy higher education, healthy environment, healthy communities. And we're on a countdown here, so we got to start to wrap up. But so let's articulate the kind of state we want, and then let's have a discussion of what would that cost. Is it $86 billion a year? That's what we've shrunk our budget to support a $2 trillion economy in this state. Would it be better at $100 billion, $120 billion? What's a reasonable price tag to have quality education, protect our environment, et cetera? And then, what's an equitable way to pay for that? And let's examine our tax code, and let's look at our polluters paying a fair share for their polluting and what it's costing us either in health or cleanup or whatever it is, and you can go down the list. So we do need to wrap up. I'm going to stick around for a while, so I'm glad to answer other questions. But just for our formal engagement here, I just want to again conclude by thanking all of you, not just for being here, but as I look around the room for what you're doing in your community. And where some of the most vital change does happen is in our local communities, where we can see the tangible results of our efforts, whether it's cleaning a particular waterway or working for local transit or whatever it is. I look forward to continuing to work with you. The stakes are very high in our state and in our nation. 2012 is going to be a decisive year on the election front. I'm here not in a campaign mode, but I will invite you to look at my website, billmonning.org, because I will be pursuing a Senate seat in 2012 that will include this area. And again, I just want to invite you to be part of that. The only thing that keeps me going is standing on the shoulders of people like you in communities like Felton, where I feel so privileged to represent this most beautiful part of the state in Sacramento, and I'm awed every day by the responsibility that I've taken on and people have vested me with. I feel inadequate to the task much of the time, but I'm empowered by people who are working together. And so we need to not let certain forces divide us. We need to stand together. We need to keep pushing in the same direction. And we need to remember that by supporting each other in friendships, in healthy relationships, we draw on that not by pursuing the long-term objective, but by supporting each other in the path as we get there. So thank you so much. Have a healthy weekend, healthful lives, and thank you for being here.